All right, everyone. I've got like 5:59, almost 6 o'clock on the presentation. Um, we have a lot more people here than I thought we were going to have tonight. I thought when we'd send out the link for everything that we wouldn't have many people show up. But looking like 25. And for those that are recording, if you have any questions after the presentation, reach out to me. I'll try to help out. Um, so, um, yeah, a couple things, guys. On the screen now, you guys you can see the PowerPoint slides, everything, the Google slides, all of that. Thumbs up. All right. Um, on that, there's a QR code that'll take you to like a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. If you guys want to have those for the future, if you want to look up stuff and go back to it, you can. Um, for those that are watching it recording, I'm going to try to have it in some central place. But at the moment, I don't know how we're going to share this out. I think it might just be a recorded YouTube video that I send out as a link so that way everyone can get access to it wherever it is. Um, so, to kind of get started, guys, um, tonight's presentation is really about how to conduct a systematic literature search. I mean, that's kind of what the title is. I think a lot of you that have shown up tonight are actually in senior thesis right now, or you might be given an assignment for internship, aquatics, or something like that, where you've been told that you have to find research articles about a topic and look all of that up and actually, go through that process. But conducting a literature search can be daunting at first, especially if you've never actually done it before, which a lot of you may have had it, as you went through 370 um, with Professor Nardella and you had that, you would have had some form of, research searching with that. But when we think about things like senior thesis, it's a pretty daunting task, right? How many references that you have to find and kind of tell a story with everything. So what I would like to do tonight is kind of share with you that process a little bit and how to make it easier on yourselves. And towards the end of the talk, I'll actually pull up PubMed and show you guys some tips and tricks to make this whole like literature search thing really, really easy for all of you. All right. So I'm hoping to give you some practical stuff that you can actually, sit down tomorrow with and actually use if you wanted to. So when we talk about the literature searching process, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on stuff tonight. But remember, what I want you guys to realize is there's no right or wrong way to kind of do this. Each person's going to have their own style, their own process, and their own methods to kind of keep themselves on track. And a lot of this literature searching process, it comes down to just being organized. So I'm going to really show you guys some neat tricks at the end to be able to stay organized. But it also, you know, there are some underlying things that you can do when you start your search that's going to set you up for better success. So I'm going to try to go through kind of the general review process from a big picture today, to allow that process to be a little bit easier for you. So when we look at the steps of the review process, the first thing we'll talk about is actually defining the research question, which is probably one of the most underlooked steps in the whole process. If you're in senior thesis right now, you have to submit a topic idea. You'll be working with, your faculty mentor advisor through that process. I really strongly encourage you, if you're going through senior thesis right now and you're having your topic idea, that you're not just waiting to the submission day to kind of submit your topic to those faculty members, that being proactive, talking them throughout the process, and they'll help you come up with a strong research question. And we'll see here in the next couple slides what that research question looks like and why it's so important to have one. So when we then go through that, we'll talk about into some of the key concepts like a PICO table, what population, intervention, controls, and outcomes. Some simple key things that can help you with that. We'll talk about key concepts. We'll go through how to actually then take those concepts and come up with a research strategy, and then how to actually go through that search process tonight. So when we talk about a research question, what we're interested in is, the research question itself it needs to have a couple things with it. The first is the research question clear? Is there enough information in that question that the audience can really understand what you're actually searching for? So you don't want to do something vague, like just start searching for maybe Achilles tendon and injury, because that's going to be, what about Achilles tendon and what about injury? Are you looking at maybe the recovery process in that? the injury rates between athletes. You need to be very clear in what you're actually searching for. You need to also make it focused. So when you get that clear explanation, start to narrow down your topic a little bit. So if we're going to talk about something like Achilles tendon and injury, are we looking at, injury rates in maybe basketball players versus other team sports? How do we take our bigger idea and narrow it down in a way that we can actually start to search for articles? All right. Because when we think about and we look at PubMed, and we'll see it in a little bit, it's very much like a Google search. That if you start very broad, you're going to get very broad answers. But the more focused you come with those questions, the better it is at finding articles for you. And that's ultimately what you're going to want to do when you do this. Uh, you know, uh, the research question itself, especially when you get to the senior thesis level, we want that, to be a relatively complex question, right? It shouldn't be just a yes or no question. Like when you ask the research question, it should be open ended, and you should have, some flexibility to go down a couple different avenues um, with answering that question. And a really good question, some of the best senior theses are those senior theses that are actually a little arguable, where there might be some pluses and minuses to it. And a good example of things like that is stuff like ketogenic diets and athletes, some of the popular stuff now that, on one side, ketogenic diet may be beneficial for weight loss, but it also hinders performance. So is there some type of argument in there, something where you can really sit down and come up with a good question to ask? So some of the steps in developing your research question, you know, choose something that's interesting. All right. I don't know how many times I've told students this, that the best literature searches and the best searches overall are those searches that you're interested in. If it's something that like you keep coming back to, that's came up in class, that's something that like every time you sit down to read about it, you're excited, you're going to be more likely to go back and keep digging for more and more articles. And that's going to be the overall process. So, when you come up with your question, make sure it is something you're interested in and not just something someone told you to do, because then it gets kind of boring through that process. Uh, Start open as you also develop it. Start opening yourself those open-ended questions. Maybe it's a process question like, how does this work in the body? Why does this work, or why do we see benefits with this type of training for certain athletes? And really start asking those how and why questions, because those are going to be the ones that really start to get you down the avenue of a good search to begin with. And then once we get that, clear, focused question, we'll start the actual search process. So as we go through today, and some of the examples I'm going to give here over the next, 20, 30 minutes, you know, I'm going to use the example of a research question of a topic that I'm interested in. I start making lectures for 369, and I start looking for articles and stuff to bring into that class. So a question that I'm interested in is, what is the effectiveness of strength training for endurance cycling performance? And it's not a super broad question, right? We've narrowed that question down to, we're looking at strength training and we're looking at endurance cycling performance. We're not just looking at, cycling in general or some vague concept of exercise, but we're trying to have it to where we can actually go through and do that search process. So when we go through the examples today and what I search for and kind of show you guys on the slide is me using key terms around this question. So we're trying to find articles relating to the effectiveness of strength training for endurance cycling performance. So to get started, one of the easiest things to do, and developing a research question, coming up with the topic idea and everything, it's a little bit of a catch-22, guys. If you haven't read a lot of research, or you're not really familiar with the topic, you don't really know how to focus your research question because you haven't read a lot. So one of the easiest ways to, one, develop a question and first start your search is start off using just a very basic search in PubMed. So just 2 keywords of something you're interested in. And we'll see on the next slide here, just search for something, resistance training and cycling, 2 phrases that are related to the overall topic, but can maybe point us in the right direction. And one of the things I encourage you to do as a student is look for recent review articles. So other articles that are published in this field. And if you read those recent review articles, they might give you ideas on where you want to take your review. Maybe there's something that stands out within that you're interested in, or some articles that they're citing, and it kind of gives you a jumping off point for everything because you're not really that familiar with the literature. You haven't really sit down and read a lot of articles. So starting with that review article can make it really easy for that process. All right, so if we go to PubMed, and I'll show you this example here in a minute, but we can just go to PubMed and go to the general search bar and type in resistance training and cycling. And we'll talk about these Boolean operators here in a little bit. But this and, combines that search to where we're only looking for articles that talk about resistance training and the cycling. And I would be lying to you if I also didn't pick this topic because the very first search term when you look that up is a recent review article of 2014 looking at strength training for endurance athletes, specifically cycling endurance performance. So right away, if I was doing this search on this topic, I would have a pretty recent review article to be able to go through and read and kind of figure out, what do we know and what don't we know, and what have we learned maybe since 2014. The good thing about PubMed also, guys, is it gives you some information on whether or not your topic is interesting to a broader audience. And what I mean by that is you can look by the search results by year. And we can see in 1975, no one was really interested in resistance training for endurance or cycling endurance athletes. But recently, we see this big increase in articles that are published and those search results go up. So that gives you an idea of maybe there's articles that are getting published here. There's something that you might be interested in, and you can go that route for yourself because you're going to find some pretty common or pretty new articles to use for your search. So, if you pull up a general search and it looks like it's not that popular, you might want to start thinking about whether or not you're going to find those recent articles on that topic of interest that you have. Now, from here, you can do a couple things. And I'm going to link on this next slide to a website. And if you guys have the PDF that I shared out with the handouts, you should have the link to this. But it's the concept of forward and backward citation tracking. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means. So we take that review article that we found. So for example, we're going to use this review article that I found by Ronstadt and do forward and backward citation tracing to kind of find relevant articles or other search terms that I might be interested in. So we started very general, right? We had a very just general topic, resistance training and cycling. I found a recent review article, and now I want to see what other stuff is out there on the topic. And I do that through forward and backward tracing. You guys might do it naturally. You just don't know that it was actually called something. So from one relevant article, you can use forward and backward tracing to identify other key terms. So forward citation tracing, right? So what articles, if I pull up that reference or that review article by Ronstadt, what other articles have reference to article you're reading, or what other articles are similar to the articles you're reading? And when we get into PubMed, they have really great features to be able to help you with this process. So the first of those is going to be looking at similar articles. So if we pull up PubMed and we were to click on that article from optimizing strength training for running and cycling performance, we would see to the right-hand column a nice button that says similar articles. All right. So similar articles to this are going to use similar keywords. This is PubMed's way of kind of navigating and keeping you, finding other relevant research information. So if we were to click on that button, what we'd see is all of the similar articles that are posted here. So you're going to see articles that are very closely related. So we're looking now at these are primary articles. So we had the review article, and now we're finding those original studies. This is a quick way to do that. We found strength training improves cycling performance in female cyclists. So that article seems kind of interested in what we're talking about. We see other things on increasing strength and endurance cycling performance, but we also see articles that maybe aren't that relevant, right? Where we have this article in endurance trained runners. So the similar articles is great. It can help you pull out and find some of that other stuff to kind of quickly add into your research or your search without having to do a whole lot of digging for other stuff. If you find one article that's like, this topic is really related to what I'm looking at, you can use PubMed's built-in features to make that easier for you. One of the things that I want you to get in the habit of, though, is not treating this like a Google search. You know how the front page of Google, when you Google something, like the top three hits are like everything, right? That's not how PubMed works, all right? It's not going to pull out in the top in that first search page the most important article for you. It's just going to pull out the article that has the best keywords for that search. So if you do the best keyword matching, it'll pull up that. So make sure you guys are always clicking see similar articles and keep digging through, and don't rely on that first search page because it's not Google, right? It's not going to give you the best article for your search. It's just based off the keywords, and then it's your job to keep going back through and digging through everything. The other button that you can see right underneath of similar articles is cited by. So this is the other way we can look at forward citation tracing. Is not just similar articles, but what other articles has referenced the article you're reading. Because if another article has referenced the article you're reading, just like you're going to reference an article for your lit review because it's related to your topic, you can assume then that these authors are referencing an article that they think is important, and there's probably something that's going to be related, another study then that's related to this topic. And it's a very quick way for you to kind of check on that. So when you click that cited by, one of the first thing that pops up is a different article where we look at the comparison of short sprint and heavy strength training on cycling performance. So just within finding one key review article and looking at that front page, we found one, two, three, what, five relevant articles just by clicking two buttons that were to our topic, right? So it made the search very easy on you by using PubMed's built-in features and kind of finding those articles that are similar or cited by. But once again, that's not the only way to do that. So we also have backward citation tracing, uh, which is what articles has the article you are reading actually referenced. So if we were to pull up that original review article by Ronstadt and look at what they're referencing, right? We could go through and see what they're referencing and notice right off the bat, because it's a review article in strength training and endurance athletes, you're going to find a lot of primary references there that they've cited by. All right. So it can kind of lead you down this rabbit hole of who's citing who, who's referencing what, and what really is the overall story here, because these other researchers have started to piece stuff together. Is that starting to make sense for you guys? That you have some fun ways to be able to do this, and it's not just sitting in front of PubMed and typing in resistance training and cycling, strength training and cycling. We can do all of that and make one good search, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do behind the scenes that goes into this search process beyond just that search builder. So I want you guys to be aware of that as we go through. Some of the things that you should also think about when you're looking at those references. Is there anything that this review article didn't reference that might also be potentially useful information, right? So if we look down here, you know, we can see articles published on the determinants of endurance performance. So, that might be helpful if we're looking at a study or we're making a review on endurance cycling performance. We might want to know what actually limits that. So we should probably read this article and figure out, what is the underlying physiology here? What's the underlying performance? And where does strength training fit in with all of this? So you can start reading those kind of things. Um, uh, Looking at the replacing endurance performance by explosive strength exercises. So although they're not in cyclists, they could be runners, and you can find other relevant information out of there. So don't, keep your search focused on your main topic, but also keep your eyes open for other stuff through those articles of titles that stand out to you of where you might be able to use this in your overall search process. All right. To build a good search. So we talked about, you know, uh, those keywords. And at the first, I started off with a general search where I was just looking at resistance training and cycling, right? Two pretty generic terms that were related to the topic. All right. As you build your searches, and you can go a little bit further, sometimes you're starting, maybe it's, you're new to the topic, so you don't really know what the keywords are that you're searching for. All right. Like you have a general idea, but you've never actually researched this. So you didn't know that maybe there's a specific term for strength training that maybe in the search terms you're better off typing in resistance training because that's more of the commonly accepted terms. So you need to know that. If you just started typing in strength training, you might miss a lot of the different stuff. Uh, so we can build a better search by focusing on four big things. Uh, we do this when we do systematic reviews, and a lot of researchers will use this technique and use what we call a PICO table. All right, PICO just stands for population, intervention, controls, and outcome. And I encourage all of you to write these down as you go through your search. The population, who am I actually interested in? All right. Is it when I'm looking in this, and for my example, I said cyclist. Am I looking at well trained cyclists? Am I looking at, just cycling in general? Like if you take anyone and have them do resistance training, is there a specific population? If you're doing more of a clinical research, is there a clinical population? Is it an individual with type 2 diabetes? Is it an individual with type 1 diabetes? What is the actual population you're interested in for those research subjects? And kind of write that down and be specific with it. Was there some type of intervention? Not all reviews are going to have this intervention component to it, but if it was an intervention, typically you can have a variety of different reviews, and maybe you want to look at something like return to play after ACL repair, doing standardized treatment versus like resistance training, for example, right? To kind of keep it in theme here. The intervention here would be standard treatment, resistance training. What intervention are they actually applying in these studies that you want to actually compare when you go through? Controls, are you trying to compare this to another outcome? Are you looking at the benefits of, say, resistance training on mental health? And your controls could be resistance training versus a group that did no training at all. Or it could be comparing a group that did aerobic training. Like, is resistance training better than those for mental health than just aerobic training alone? So think of what you're actually comparisons you're making when you sit down with the research question. And this PICO table comes a lot from that main research question, right, guys? Like if we look at this and we think about these words, these are the key words that you're going to be putting in your topic or that research question idea that you have for your review to begin with. So it really helps with that. And then also start thinking about outcomes. As an undergraduate, uh, you probably don't know what the outcomes are until you start reading, right? You might be interested in, functional performance or activities of daily living, but you don't know that there's a thing called a short performance physical battery test, right? You don't know that it's actually a sit to stand test. That's how we measure performance. So we might not have that exact idea laid out at first, but you can develop that as you search and read more articles and kind of narrow down that outcome and what you're actually comparing as you go through. But make sure you have somewhat of a general idea of what you're looking at, because it helps you focus on just those articles that are related centrally to your research question and how you're going to answer it and approach it. All right. You can find uh, other search terms built right into some of the features with PubMed. All right. The good thing is, if you search generically, like resistance training and cycling, they'll also pull in, PubMed will naturally pull in some of these other search terms for you. But if you're not sure what those search terms are, but you found a review article that's kind of similar, or even a general research article that's similar, you can click on your mesh terms here. And these mesh terms are going to be, all of those terms that are kind of related to what your general topic is. So you might be seeing bicycling physiology. That could be interesting. It would be interesting to me with my research project idea. Athletic performance, lactic acid, as we know, that's a marker of endurance performance. So a lot of various things here that you want to go in. Uh, Say, for example, I was comparing resistance training and I'm looking at performance. But what if I wanted to look at the negative or adverse effects? Like, were there any adverse effects of resistance training in cyclists? And that's what my question was. We now know that there's a subsection here, resistance training with adverse effects, that you can search for specifically in PubMed that'll only pull up those articles that are relating to that. So it kind of helps you narrow down things as you go through. So we start broad and then we can get more specific. So this is a good way for you to find those similar articles uh, as you go through. Uh, One of the things to kind of focus on or think about is actually alternate spellings as well. This happens a lot with our friends over in the UK, right? They'll spell behavior a little bit differently than we will. They'll throw in a U there. They'll spell program differently. So they'll put in an M and an E at the end of that. So that alternate spelling plays a big role in how we search for stuff. And we can teach PubMed to actually search for alternate spellings. And maybe I'll show you guys how to do that as well. So we don't just limit ourselves to those articles published from authors in the United States or speaking or writing in our English. All right. I touched briefly upon, like, now we have the research question and we've done a general search. We found some more search terms, right? But now we want to try to get a little bit more specific in our research question. We want to narrow down what we're looking for a little bit so we don't have this super broad area that we're going for. So when we search, we can use what we call Boolean operators. All right. This is operators tell PubMed what to search for. So we noticed in my first general search, I used and. So when we use and, it will search not just for the articles that are labeled A. So in this example, resistance training, and not just the articles that are related to cycling, but only those articles that discuss cycling and resistance training, or resistance training and cycling, or as close as we can do that. It excludes anything that talks about them individually. So making sure that we use that, the right operators, gives us the right information. You could also use or. So be careful with this, because or is going to give you the broadest search, because it's going to give you not just that overlaps nice area, but it's also going to give you each of those subsets individually standing on their own. So it'll give you the most articles, but it's the least specific search that we have. The not operator, I tend not to use it as much, but there are specific cases that you want to go through that. Uh, and it's a lot of it goes down to controls and how you're going to narrow down the search. But it's a very complicated one, and most of you are going to be able to do that with just the and or function within PubMed. That the not is if you want to exclude specific articles based off of something that you want to look at resistance at aerobic training and not resistance training, right? You want to look specifically at that. So we can look at some examples here of how this works. The first one, if we were looking at children and television, it was going to retrieve records that contain both of those terms, or children and poverty. We could do television or television viewing, that we're interested just in the general topic of television. It can fall under either of those terms. So we're going to get a variety of different things. A good example of the not function is we're interested in stuff with the television. We don't actually care about stuff relating to movies. We're only cared about TV viewing time. This was probably made before Netflix and Hulu, where our TV viewing was also our movie viewing, and everything was all wrapped up into one nice program for us. But needless, that's how we would use an example of the not function within PubMed. So how do we do this? So how can we start to combine this stuff? All right. So I start, anytime you're building a search, the best way to sit down with it, you can come up with a table like this. You can use Google Docs. You can use an old legal pad, pen and paper. It's up to you. But I usually start out with the PICO, or at least this in mind. Start off with the population and list, anything that I think might be related to my population, what my intervention is, and then what outcomes am I specifically looking at. And for this example, I chose, for cycling endurance performance, I'm really interested in, does resistance training improve lactic threshold? And that might be listed as aerobic or anaerobic threshold. So I have to throw in a bunch of different search terms there. I could also be doing a broader search for, does resistance training improve other factors of endurance performance? So I could look at things like economy or efficiency or oxygen consumption. I could do a separate search on VO2 max if I wanted to talk about it from a broad point of view. But this is where you have the freedom with your lit review to figure out what you're actually going to focus on with everything. But if you know what your outcomes are, you know what your intervention is, you know what your population is, and what you're comparing it against, you're going to find really good searches, because you're going to have all the right keywords in there when you start that search. All right. So that's why I really push you guys to have this stuff done at the beginning. All right. All right. So, how do we actually use this? All right. We can throw everything together. So, PubMed's really cool. Think of it as like your old school TI-83 calculators. Did you guys even use those when you were in high school? Was that like a thing? All right. I don't know how old I am relative to what you are with technology in the classroom. All right. But remember when we do those math operations and we put everything in parentheses and we can build stuff first, right? And we can put stuff in parentheses to do parts of the equation first and then other parts out. Well, we can do the exact same thing in PubMed. All right. We can have this long, we can group stuff together. So you can use multiple Boolean operators into one big search. So this is an example of me using that Pico table, right? I started off just looking at cycling or endurance. I was like, I'm just going to start broad, right? So I use that or operator. Anytime you see this asterisk, if you type this into PubMed, if you type in CYCLI asterisk, that means any word, it'll fill in any word after that. So that could fill in cyclist, IST. It could fill ing, ING at the end. It stops the search and kind of makes it more broad. So if you're using terms like behavior that might have that alternate spelling, being able to use that asterisk will help you start that search process because that's how we avoid those alternate spellings. So if you can think of a word that, if you have a word that's in your search that needs an alternate spelling and you add an asterisk to it, it will search for those first five letters or those first letters that you have before that, and then kind of fill in the blank with everything after that. So anything that starts with those letters before the asterisk, it'll pull out for your search. So it's a really neat way to do that. So you notice that I use the or operator here because I was interested in both. And then I was combined in, I'm interested in strength training or resistance training, right? So I decided to do resistance or strength because those terms are both kind of used similarly that I've saw through the articles. But I'm only looking in those articles that are talking about my original Pico table. So cycling and endurance athletes with resistance or strength training on lactic threshold. So when I look that, and so I then combine that with all of my different terms that I think are going to be related most closely to lactic threshold in cyclists. So lactate, lactic acid, anaerobic threshold, combining all of that stuff together into one big search. All right. So it'll search for everything. And if I can get my computer to work, is that showing you guys the PubMed screen loading on your end, not just the slideshow? Great. So when I do that, you'll see, I think in my example, I might have a little bit more results than the next. That I have 1,500 uh, articles, or almost 1,500 articles pop up in that search. When I do that search, one of the good things that I know that I did a search right is that review article popped right back up there at the top, or an article that's very similar to the type of style that I'm looking for. Uh, we can see other articles as we go through and how they relate, and you're going to see a long list. But remember, this isn't the front page of Google. We'll talk about that here on the next slide. So make sure that you scroll down and you start looking through some of those other articles. All right. Um, as you go through that process. So as we had that, look at that. Two more results from popped up from last week when I made you guys this article. Just two new articles must have got published in that time. So remember, we're not going to treat that like Google. We're going to go through the articles, try to read as many as we can, find that stuff, but using things like that forward and backward citation tracing to make that process a little bit easier to kind of narrow our focus down a little bit faster. All right. Um, so how to keep track of everything? That's 1,500 articles in one search. You're going to have a ton of different articles that you read for everything, and you have it. There's a couple ways to do it. You can do the old school uh, paper and pen, right? You can just write down every article that you found, author's name, title, journal, but that's a lot of work. And you guys are technology savvy and probably don't have a notebook in your house that much. So we can also use stuff like Google Docs or Sheets, anything for you to kind of keep track of those articles in the search. The good thing is, and this is where we're going to spend a lot of the rest of our time doing, is uh, PubMed itself, and I'll talk about that here in a couple of slides of how do we use the built-in features from PubMed to do all of the heavy work for us. So it makes it really, really, really easy for you guys. Um, anything that you want to do with this though, ultimately comes down when you're doing your search. What search terms did you use? What articles did you find? Did you find any other terms as you were looking through? Was it a bad search? Did you just like search for something and you're like, this was not related to my topic and I need to go back to the drawing board? Or maybe I added so many operators in that I got like 5 articles, and that's not what we want to do either, right? We want to have some type of broad capture with that. But if we keep track of what searches you use and what articles you find, then you don't have to go back and do that whole search all the way over again, right? You've already searched for it, you know what you're looking for, and you can save yourself some time on that end. So, for an example of that, you can keep everything in a Google Doc, like I said, what dates you did it, resistance training and cycling. I said I found that review article of what I was looking for, and that it was pretty broad, but a lot of articles stood out that I was interested in, and you could store those elsewhere if you wanted to. I then did the next day, I found out, I sat down on my Pico table, decided I'd make a bigger search, and found about 1,500 articles total. But as I was reading through, about 10 to 15 that I was really interested in that I want to read. All right. So you can keep it general like that, but more specific. I suggest you guys at least keep track of what articles you're finding in some manner. And that's how I'm going to show you to do that in a different way. Because it's 2021. We've got all the technology in the world in front of us, and there's a lot easier ways to keep track of all this research than pen and paper in a Google Doc. All right. So we're going to cover these next couple minutes here using PubMed to your advantage. So, how to create a PubMed account, uh, viewing the search history, uh, how you're actually going, and then how to create collections in PubMed and share articles with yourself either through email or save them so they're all centrally stored in your own PubMed account and you never lose an article again because it's all right there in front of you. All right. So, those of you that are doing senior thesis now, I really suggest trying to go this route because it'll make your information gathering a lot easier on yourself and you're going to have a lot less headaches as you go through. All right, so let's pull up PubMed. You can either do this with me if you want to, or you can just, come back to the video after it's recorded. But when you go into PubMed, the first thing that I encourage you guys to do is go to WVU Library and log in through that, and then accessing PubMed through the databases. Because then any article that we have for free, you guys can pull up at that time. But I'm going to skip that process tonight so we don't have to go through Duo two-factor authentication and all of that fun stuff that they make us do. So when you get to PubMed, you can go up here to the top and click on Login. So when you log in, I have an account created, but you can create your own account. And this is where I hope internet for some reason starts working. All right, cool. Thank you for the login warning. All right, you guys can create your account and you'll want to create an NCBI account. All right, that's just an account that you can create with PubMed that allows you to store information in this virtual space. All right. Uh, Once you have an account, you can do a lot of really cool things with that. All right, so I'm going to start searching now. Right, I'm going to ignore the fact that I'm logged into my account. It's just sitting there running in the background. All right, but say I found this article and I was looking, oh, that article looks interesting. Maybe that article looks interesting. We'll pick the three, right? Typically, you guys would write it down in pen and paper. Like, I found this article, and have that. Right? There's a lot easier way to do this. Um, the first thing that you can do is you can save those. You can send those articles to yourself. So you can send them through email. So for here, I can email you myself those 3 articles. And if I type my email address in and hit send, it's going to send the 3 articles that I selected. I can also send all of the results, but I don't want to send all the results on that, right? I just want to send those 3 articles that I'm interested in. So you can email them to yourself. You always have it stored in your email someplace and have that on record. maybe your professor asked you to do a literature review and you found a really cool article for them and you're like, hey, I want them to see this. You can click on it, hit send, type their email address in, send it off to them, and they'll have that link and information there for them. You can also save. So when you go to save, you can save those three articles as a summary, text, or PubMed link. You can even save it as a CSV. All right, so you can save it as an Excel file, so it gives you all the citation information that you want to use later. But one of the ones that I find myself using the most is Send To. All right, when you go to Send To, you want to click two things: either the one thing, which is going to be my collection or collections. All right, from here you can create a new collection. So for this one, I'm going to name it Resistance Training and Cycling. So these are articles that are related to my topic that I'm interested in. And we notice here that it's only going to send those three articles that I'm interested in. And when I click add to that collection, well, I already have a collection name for that. I'm going to name it Practice 2 so you guys can actually see that today. So I sent that to a collection here. When you go back up to your account at the top, you're going to see a dashboard. So my NCBI dashboard. From here, you can do things like go through and actually look at your collections. So I'm going to go to manage collections here. And we see that I have collections on articles that are related to postprandial metabolism, articles that I did for another search, obesity and functional limitations, lactic threshold, resistance training and cycling. But if I go to that collection that I just created and click on that, you're going to find those three articles that you thought were important all stored in one place for you. So you're never going to lose those research articles. All right. And it's probably one of the most underrated features that PubMed has built in and probably the least used for undergrads or anyone trying to do a literature review. It keeps all of that stuff in one nice place and you never have to go back and do anything with it. And I even underuse it as a faculty member. And every time I give this speech, I think I need to use this more because it helps me keep stuff where I need to keep it. All right. So that's one really cool thing that you can do is go through with that. All right. One of the other things that you can do with your searches that I think is really cool is you can create save searches or create an alert. So if it's something that's getting a lot of stuff published recently or want to do and kind of figure out stuff and get or just be updated on the topic, if you go back to PubMed and I'd say I do resistance training, cycling again, I can create an alert. All right. So when I create an alert for this, it will actually PubMed will email me and I can pick it to be daily, weekly, monthly, but it'll email me to my account the first Sunday of the month and send at most 5 items. I could have it send 200 items. But basically, PubMed will run that search again. And any new thing that popped up or falls into that search process will be sent to you as an email. So you don't have to go back and rerun that search. It'll kind of do that for you at a different time. So it's a fun way to do it if you want to keep on top of something as you go through. Um, I think, as I sit down and go through that, that's probably the two biggest things that I use for PubMed. And it's probably the biggest thing or the most beneficial for you is those collections and being able to send stuff. So just sending it to yourself as a collection, either emailing it to you so you can have some version of that link. But I highly recommend that you don't just do the search and then go back and have to do the search and look over the articles again because you're just going to be searching and finding and coming up with different stuff. Really take your time, kind of scroll through this big search, click on those articles. From here, remember we can do things like the cited by. So look at all those articles that have cited those review articles or those studies. Look for things like similar articles, and you have all of that within place. Um, One of the good things with PubMed, another feature for you guys as you sit down, is you can cite this and pick the format that you need to go through. So for senior thesis, I think it has the right format for you guys in there. I think is it APA? what you guys, I can't remember what you guys have to do for senior thesis. Um, but you can actually cite that, have that link ready to go, and do some of your citation stuff as well with it. All right. That's kind of the big ones with the PubMed and being able to go through that process. Um, as I sit down and as we kind of stop to talk a little bit today, you know, some of the things that I want to keep you guys, some tips for you guys. One, stay organized. All right. So keep notes of your searches and those results. If you find interesting articles, don't trust yourself that you're going to remember what author that was and what study that was, and you'll find it at a different time. Create those collections in PubMed and add it to it, or even if you don't have an account, email it to yourself so you never forget it and you always have that in one place, because you will forget it. I do it all the time that I think I'm not going to, and I do. Uh, Scope and rescope. So what I mean for that is we're going to narrow our focus down. If we're getting articles that we think we're interested in, but it's not right, let's back out and figure out what we need to do to then narrow our focus back down. Um, and test and retest. So we're going to always test our searches, right? We're going to try it one way, go back, fix the search, add the better terms, maybe find keywords to help through that process. Um, and what we're going to do is also accept the point of diminishing returns. Right? It's always this balancing act. You can sit here and search and search and search and search and find articles all day, but eventually, is it actually worth it to keep digging that hole and keep going down that rabbit hole just to find maybe one or two more articles? All right. If you're doing forward and backward citation tracing on articles that are very similar to what you want to talk about, you've used good search terms related to your topic, you're very likely going to find those articles that are most relevant to you, and you're not going to miss out on a whole lot. Maybe an article here and there, but for the purposes of doing a literature review, you know, those processes will serve you the best. Is thinking about your Pico table, forward and backward citation tracing, and then really building that search and trying it again and trying different things um, is the best way to go about it. All right. Uh, yeah, and that's kind of all I have, I think, tonight on looking up and actually conducting a systematic literature search, or at least helping get you guys in that process with everything. That we're not just, typing in random words into PubMed and hoping things work out, that we're very specific with our Pico table and how we use and combine those search terms, and then how we're actually looking for articles that are relevant. All right. With that being said, guys, I'm going to open it up. Does anyone have any questions of stuff that I didn't covered that you guys are interested in or want to learn about? I might be able to do one of these later on again here this semester if there's some other topic. But yeah, with that, do you guys have any questions with anything? Seeing some head shaking. I'm going to try. I don't see anything in the chat pop up. You can either ask in the chat, you can ask with that. Um, with that being said, I really hope it helps out with everything. If you guys could give me a thumbs up if you thought it was actually helpful, just so, all right. Is that more than what you guys knew going into searching for stuff? You feel a little bit more confident with it to be able to do it now? All right. Uh, if there's any question, let me know. I'll try to help out. It's not just right now. This isn't your last chance to ask questions for stuff. So if there's anything I can do, I will be there to help out and try to go through that process. And if there's anything that you get tripped up with, creating this PubMed account and you want to meet with me to Zoom, I can help you do that as well and walk through it. All right. Good luck. Let me know. And yeah, with that being said, you guys can head out, go on with your way. And if you want to stick around and ask me a question when everyone leaves, you can do that as well. So have a good night, guys.